Today we are starting the chapter of breast with normal histology and grossing. Our moderator today is Dr. K.A. Basu because Dr. Anita ma'am is not able to join us. Dr. K.A. is a professor of pathology at IPGMER, Kolkata. Welcome, ma'am. Speaker for today is Dr. Ayushi Sahai. She's a professor in Department of Pathology at TMC Mumbai. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
The webinar hosts are Dr. Anita Borges, ma'am, who's a consultant pathologist at Center of Oncopathology, Tata Trust Mumbai, and Dr. Sumit Gujral, sir, professor, TMH Mumbai. And with me is Dr. Tripura Sundari, who's a professor at Vinayaka Mission Medical College, Karaikal, Pondicherry. We will be moderating this session. These are few reminders. In case of any interruption or low sound or video freezing, kindly leave the meeting and rejoin the same link. Answer the poll questions in the chat box and please do not send request for annotation to the presenters. Few disclaimers. Few other disclaimers. Regarding the upcoming talks, we have 2 slide seminars, Approach to Benign Lesions of Breast, faculty being Dr. Dilip Giri, who is from MSKCC, New York, which is on 2nd of May. And the next slide seminar, which is a case-based discussion for exam-going MD pathology students. We have 2 faculties, Dr. Nilotpal Chaudhary from AIIMS Rishikesh and Dr. Prashant Joshi from AIIMS Mangalagiri. So with this, I invite Ayushi ma'am for the talk. I'll stop sharing and you can share your slides, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Geeta. Yeah. So welcome everyone, all those who have logged in for the inaugural chapter of breast pathology today. I'll be starting with the normal histology and grossing of the breast. I would like to thank Dr. Gujral and Dr. Borges for giving me the opportunity to present here, and for Dr. Geeta and Dr. Tripura for being the moderators, and Dr. Kea for being the chairperson. So these are a few of my disclaimers. Now, the anatomy of the breast, as you all know, the breast lies in the lateral sternal border to the mid-axillary line and superior inferiorly from the 2nd to the 6th rib. The breast is basically a modified apocrine organ which is composed of multiple lobules, which all drain into ductules and ducts which drain on the nipple. So basic function being lactation. And the breast is, the lobules are resting on supporting stroma, which is the connective tissue, and fat. And the breast is artifactually man-made, divided into 4 quadrants by one vertical and one horizontal line passing through the nipple into the 4 major quadrant that you know, upper outer, upper inner, lower outer, lower inner, with some people considering retroareolar region as the 5th, also known as the central quadrant. Now, I want you to remember that these are man-made and artifactual separation. There is no anatomical separation like these quadrant within the breast. Inside the breast, these lobules are arranged in a 3-dimensional network, and there is a lot of crossover of one lobule which might start over here and go over here, or in different directions. So this kind of separation is artifactual. There are no actual facial planes that separate the breast into different quadrants, but it is done for ease of understanding of location of where any particular lesion in the breast is lying. So there is a good communication between the clinician, the radiologist, and the pathologist who's going to be examining breast, so that where a particular lesion is located. So as I said, it is a modified, highly specialized apocrine gland, which is composed of epithelial and the stromal component, and the main duct of the breast, which drain onto the nipple, repeatedly branch to form terminal duct, each of which ends in the lobule, which consists of multiple acini. So the functional unit of the breast is what is known as a terminal dactylo-lobular unit, which is a unit for lactation. And what is it composed of? This is a structure of a TDLU, terminal dactylo-lobular unit. This is the terminal duct, which is ending into multiple acini, and each acinus is, as well as the terminal ducts and all the ductules, are composed of a bilayer of inner luminal epithelium and outer basal or myoepithelial cell layer, which rests on basal membrane as an enveloped by the stroma surrounding the acini. And the individual bilayer of ducts, if you see, it is composed of the inner epithelial layer, which are cuboidal to columnar cells, which have some amount of eosinophilic cytoplasm and round regular nuclei with fine chromatin. In contrast, the second layer, that is the second part of the bilayer, the myoepithelial cells, are the cells, as you can see outside, which are surrounding this inner epithelial layer, and they have a more clear cytoplasm and round dark nuclei. You cannot make out the chromatin. It is a hyperchromatic dark nuclei which surround the layer of epithelial cells. They can even be flattened, and they can even just look like a single dark nucleus present at the periphery without any cytoplasm. They can get flattened. So this is the basic structure of the epithelial and the outer myoepithelial layer. And the epithelial layer, it is important to identify these two separately for various lesions of the breast. As you will be seeing in the subsequent coming lectures, we use a number of immunohistochemical markers to separate which is the epithelial part and which is the myoepithelial part. So the epithelial layer is identified by low molecular weight cytokeratins, CK7, which is the most commonly used. Other markers like CK8, 18 can also be used, as it is important to note that this is a hormonally reactive layer. It responds to hormones. So it is having the hormonal markers ER and PR, which in a normal breast are distributed little heterogeneously, because there is heterogeneity of response to hormonal markers. So these are the heterogeneity of the ER and PR is present in the normal breast lobules, the epithelial layer. Also, they express the other breast markers such as gamma globin and GCDFP, and because they are epithelial cells, they also have membranous E-cadherin. Now, in contrast, the myoepithelial layer, which is the outermost contractile layer, myoepithelial. So, myoid part of it is basically the normal function being a contractile meshwork which contracts the lobules when secretion is required for the purpose of lactation. So, they are marked by the basal keratin such as high molecular weight cytokeratin, CK5-6, CK14, CK17, and the other myoid markers such as smooth muscle actin, SMMHC, which is the smooth muscle myosin heavy chain. In addition, the other basal markers that you know in the rest of the body, for example, in prostate, you might have heard P63, P40, S100, calponin, and this is not hormonally active. So it does not mark by ER and PR. Now, the significance of this distinction being that when this myoepithelial layer is lost, it indicates that that if there is a tumor, it has broken the boundaries of the duct and come into the stroma. And as you know, hallmark of any kind of malignancy is invasion. So if the absence of this myoepithelial layer around the ductule indicates that there is an invasive carcinoma. There are a few certain exceptions that you will see as you attend the other lectures, but basically the absence of myoepithelial layer indicates in majority of the cases that there is invasion of the stroma, invasion of the outer layer of the duct. So there is an invasive carcinoma. That is the significance, and that is why these markers are important. Now, the stroma itself is also hormonally active. So the stroma of the breast also shows you ER/PR positivity, and it also in majority of the cases is positive for CD34. So how do you divide the stroma, which is the next component of the breast? You have interlobular stroma, which is present here marked by yellow arrows, that is present in between the various lobules, and it is very dense, more collagenous. And you have the intralobular stroma, which surrounds the acini within a TDLU. And it also has a number of inflammatory cells, fibroblasts, macrophages, and also the blood vessels. And this also may be hormonally responsive. The next normal structure of the breast is the nipple areola complex. Now, this is something that is obviously specialized to the breast anatomy. So what do you have? This is the kind of sections, when you take the NAC section, this is what it should look like. You should have a full kind of three-dimensional view, at least in two dimension, of the terminal ducts that are crossing through the nipple to reach the surface. So it is composed of the terminal ductules that pass through the nipple stroma, which is very cellular. It is dense, collagenous, because it has to support these lactiferous sinuses that are passing through them. The lactiferous sinuses pass through the stroma and open onto the skin, merging with the overlying epidermis of the nipple areola complex. Then this nipple areola complex is separated from the underlying breast parenchyma by a layer of smooth muscle. This is the smooth muscle in hyper. Again, this has normally a contractile function for the nipple, that this layer is present and it kind of distinguishes the landmark or anatomy of the nipple from the underlying breast. So if you have a tumor that is infiltrating through this muscle layer, that indicates that it has reached the stroma of the nipple or involving the nipple areola complex. The dermis of the nipple areola complex. In contrast to the dense collagen and the ductules that you saw and the smooth muscle layer that you saw in the nipple areola complex, the surrounding overlying skin is like the skin anywhere else in the body without these structures. So if you have a section where you're not sure that NAC has been sampled or not, it is pretty easy to make out whether the section is from the overlying skin or the NAC. So this brings us to grossing of the breast. Now, the type of specimen that you can receive in a histopath lab depends on the type of mass the patient has. If you have a palpable mass which is small in size, you can have a simple excision or a lumpectomy, wide local excision of a lumpectomy of the mass. If you have something which is impalpable, that there is no lump felt, but on screening the radiology, they have identified a lump or a mass or a calcification which they think the clinician feels requires treatment, then they might decide to do a wire localized excision or a sono-localized excision. Basically, these are radiologically guided excisions because there is nothing palpable. So if the clinician can't feel it, then how are they supposed to excise it? So they take guidance or help from various radiological modalities to identify the area of which is required to be excised and take it out safely without causing it to be left behind. Then the other kind of specimen you get is if you have these specimen with margins, you can get margin revisions. You can, specifically for nipple discharge, which is limited only to the duct anatomy, you can get microdocectomies. And of course, you have mastectomies, which most of the time are therapeutic, but in some places, prophylactic mastectomies are also starting to make an appearance. So, and then you have completion mastectomy in cases where you had a prior surgical procedure has been undertaken. So you can have a completion or a revision mastectomy. And also reduction mammoplasties are increasing day by day. So what are these various types of mastectomies that you can get? Most of the time it is a simple mastectomy in which you have the overlying ellipse of skin and the underlying breast. Not a different type of mastectomy depends on the vertical extent of the mastectomy. So if you have only the mastectomy has been done through this plane above the muscle, then it is a simple mastectomy. If you have some amount of muscle taken out from just below the, not the full muscle, but just some amount of muscle below the facial plane, it is a modified radical mastectomy. And for tumors that are going deeply through the muscle plane or involving the chest wall, you have radical mastectomies. The mastectomy can be having a axillary tail can be sent separately or attached with the specimen. If it is attached with the specimen, it is called a simple mastectomy with axillary clearance, that is known as a SMAC. So this is an SMAC. Now, increasingly with the help of a lot of plastic surgery reconstructions that are being offered to the patients, you can have procedures in which there is attempt to preserve the skin to give the patient a better cosmesis, a better result with the help of reconstruction. So in such cases, you can have what is known as a skin sparing mastectomy, where only the skin of the NAC has been removed, the rest of the skin is spared. Or you can have a nipple sparing mastectomy, where only the entire skin is spared for reconstruction, including the nipple. These generally are for lesions that are little far away located away from the nipple and the chances of involvement are low. But in such cases also, if there is any involvement of the nipple, this area found later on the under surface of the nipple, then the clinician generally opt for a revision of the surgery and the nipple is also removed. So these are only done in cases where the surgeon is pretty sure that the chances of involvement of the nipple or the skin are very low. Otherwise, most of the time you are going to have either a simple mastectomy or a modified radical mastectomy. And the selection of the procedure depends on a number of factors, including importantly the availability of radiation. Now, the wide excisions that you have, you can only offer them if you have a facility or the patient is agreeing to take radiation as an adjuvant procedure after the surgery, because knowing that it is a kind of a limited sampling of the area, it has to be combined with radiation. So if there is availability of radiation, the option of wide excision is there. If there is no radiation available, then the procedure of mastectomy. Also, of course, is most important patient choice. The patient might want to take in spite of RT not being available at that hospital, they might opt for a wide excision and take RT at another place. Or the patient might feel that, no, I do not want the breast to be preserved. I am not interested in that. Or I can opt for reconstruction later. So I would like an MRM. So that depends, besides a lot of other factors, it also depends on patient choice. Now, to identify what factors for our histopath report, what is important in grossing and what is important in reporting. There are a number of various guidelines that are available. Most commonly, which are used are the ASCO-CAP, the American Society of Pathologists, and the Royal College of Pathologists guideline, which have set the standards and provide data sets for reporting of cancers, as well as, of course, as you all know, the AJCC, the American Joint Committee on Cancer, which gives the staging and accordingly what parameters are important for reporting the staging. So many of these guidelines have recently, in fact last year only, been combined into a common document called the International Collaboration on Cancer Reporting, which provides data sets, and they have these published data sets are available on their website, that which parameters and factors have to be included in the report. So these guidelines provide us clinically useful, comprehensive and complete information so that we can provide this report to our oncologists for accurate staging as well as for taking the treatment decision, and is based on the best available evidence and studies available. And according to RCPath, these are the mandatory parameters for reporting of breast cancer. We'll be going through many of these one by one. If you understand the importance and the significance of these factors in the treatment of the patient, then you will never forget to gross in a way that you can convey this information either on gross or on subsequent microscopy. General principles of grossing remain the same as elsewhere, that fixation time is crucial. The fixative is crucial. 10% neutral buffered formalin, as you must have heard over and over again, that has to be used. And as per the ASCO-CAP recommendation, specifically because the breast undergoes evaluation for biomarkers, that is the ER/PR and HER2. So you have to have certain parameters that have been outlined. The cold ischemia time, that is the time from which the specimen has been, the blood supply is cut off and the specimen is taken out of the body till it is put in the fixative, that has to be less than 1 hour. The duration of fixation should be at the minimum of 6 and not more than 72 hours for appropriate staining of the ER/PR HER2. And because delay in fixation can lead to autolysis, tissue breakdown, there is a lot of other factors that we find difficult to interpret in a specimen that is poorly fixed. And importantly, there is loss of antigenicity, so you might have false negative results for the biomarkers. Fixative quantity should be preferably 10 times the volume of specimen, but definitely not less than 4:1. If the size of specimen is bigger, you have to use a bigger bucket, not just put the specimen, plonk it in and just little bit of formalin here, there, it is not percolating from all sides. No, it has to be a good size container in which you are able to put adequate amount of fixative to completely immerse and surround the specimen from all sides for proper fixation. Otherwise, your biomarker results will go haywire. If you are expecting a delay, then slice the specimen through the posterior aspect to preserve its orientation. Only one single cut will be enough to at least let the formalin percolate into the tumor, so at least some sections are well fixed. and before you begin grossing. Now you have to have the proper, I'm sure in your hospitals also you do have certain good histopath forms with asking for a lot of information, but I'm also sure that your clinician friends might not be filling them to your liking. So it is, as a pathologist, it is from your job also to educate your colleagues, your other fellow residents, because they are the ones who are going to be filling these forms, that this information is important for me to give you a good and proper report. So please try to fill up at the maximum you can, or if the data is available for you to access on the computer system if your hospital uses, then please do access that information and get, before you start grossing, try to get maximum information you can and make a picture of the tumor or the lesion in your mind before you start cutting. So what is the relevant information? At least some amount of history, the site, the laterality, location, and the size are of course very important before you begin your grossing, so that you can try to identify where the tumor is or lesion is located in the breast. Especially if you have if you have a small lumpectomy, of course most likely the tumor is going to be somewhere in the center of that, and it's a smaller size specimen. But when you have mastectomy, which you are going to be having in majority of the time, to identify where it is, you need to have a proper clinical information and including the relevant radiology, that you can even if say that if you don't want to, the resident, you can tell that even if you don't want to enter the information, just at least put a photocopy of the radiological reports at the end, we will figure it out. But give us some information. Where was the lesion located, what size, or what kind of BI-RADS grading it was. All that information you will get from the radiology reports. The patient might have mammogram, MRI, ultrasound. They all give the type of abnormality, size, location, and the category that they have assigned it to. That gives you an idea of the index of suspicion. What are they expecting? Are they, how high is their index of suspicion for for a malignant lesion versus a benign lesion? Is it a unifocal or a multifocal lesion? You will get all this from radiology reports. Then any previous biopsy the patient has undergone, or excision or anything with biomarker status, was it available? Any prior therapy that has been given, because that alters your grossing a lot. If there is, as you will be seeing subsequently, if there is any prior therapy given, that will definitely alter your grossing protocols. Of course, it is important to know the type of surgery, the specimen that you have received, the type of node removal, whether it is level 1, level 2, level 3, or all the nodes are together only, and of course the orientation. Especially if it is a wide excision, the specimen has to be oriented, and it has to be indicated on the form. List of all the specimen of that particular patient that are be sent to the lab, including if any frozen section has been sent, and if any information is available on any kind of clip or suture or marker placed on the specimen. You have to know that upfront before you begin grossing, rather than trying to identify those things in haphazardly later on. Once it has been grossed, it is very difficult to orient and identify again. So starting with the lumpectomy and wide local excision, the aim of this surgery is to reduce the tumor burden while maintaining the appearance. So it is basically a kind of evolved procedure from MRMs, wherein the tumor and some amount of healthy tissue is removed around it, with the caveat that the patient receives adjuvant therapy. For the clinician in this situation, and when they are doing a wide excision, they know that there is a chance that there is some amount of either tumor or DCIs or something that might get left behind, might not be identified on the margins that we have given. So that is why always these specimens are followed by adjuvant radiation. So that is a known fact. So there is nothing to get worried that, oh my God, what if this, this margin is closed or that is closed, what will happen to the patient? So you have to know that the clinician also knows when this kind of surgery is undertaken, that patient is going to receive some amount of adjuvant therapy. But the major aim is to reduce the tumor burden while maintaining the appearance, so that the patient has a normal life later on, as a near normal life later on. Because with a mastectomy, increasingly these days, the patients themselves are opting to go for wide excision, so that, and as you know that with malignancies also, after malignancy, especially breast cancer, which is easily accessible, the patients are living longer. For their living, they have to come back to normal life after a point, and they would really like it if their appearance gets maintained, so that they are not given questions or looks by the people, which is a big factor in our country, that when the treatment decisions are being taken, the patients are these days more aware of trying to maintain their appearance. So this kind of specimen is increasingly, if you're not seeing it right now in your hospital, when you move out, you're going to be seeing it, and so you need to know how to gross it. the most crucial in this report is the status of margins. Now, this kind of specimen is basically, if you imagine like a ball with a tumor at the center. So if you want to sample the margins entirely so that you are 100% sure that the margins, I have covered every kind of possible relation of margin, you are going to have to sample a large number. The whole surface area is huge. So you're going to have a large number of sections, which is not possible. So what we do is we try to imagine this specimen rather instead of a ball, but like a cube. So in the cube, you are going to have the tumor at the center and you're going to have 6 surfaces surrounding it. So then the section, you can take the tumor section along with the nearest surface. That will give a good indicator of the distance of the margin or the status of the margin, and you can have a limited number of sample but still do an adequate grossing. So this is a specimen. You imagine it as a cube. So you have you have to have 6 surfaces: superior, inferior, medial, lateral, anterior, and posterior or deep. And for getting this orientation, you need to have that marking on the specimen in at least 3 directions. So if you have a small sliver of skin on the anterior, that thing is done. You do not need any additional marking for that. But after that also you will need at least 2 more markings. Most commonly by convention, surgeons give what the short thread as a superior and the long thread as a lateral, because it is easy to remember. If that is the protocol that is routinely followed at your hospital, even if it is not written on the form, you will know that, okay, most likely this short superior and long lateral, but you should always confirm it with the surgeon. And if the skin is not included, then there is a small thread that is to be attached for the skin also. If you are not having the proper orientation of the specimen, it is not marked, it is a different specimen from the usual convention, and it is not marked, please do not proceed and cut up the specimen till you have the proper orientation, because once crossed, it is very difficult to get the orientation back again. Now coming to the inking. Once the specimen you have oriented and identified which surface is which, you need to ink it. So the inks are these days, they are very accessible and available everywhere. It is not done in your hospital. You should try to introduce it. You should try to, it is not very difficult to get used to it. And once you get used to it, believe me, you will not appreciate specimens that are there without inking. So you have to externally ink in all directions, all the surfaces you have identified, and the various inks available in the market. That in India, at least, we can commonly use the Fevicryl or acrylic paint ink, or the India ink. This is, as you can see here, the drawing ink that is by Camel. These are easily available. They are not very expensive, and you can mark the different surfaces. What you have to remember while inking is, you should try to, before inking, you should pat dry the surface and apply the ink. After that, you have to fix using a small 10% acetic acid solution or Bowen solution, or for Fevicryl ink, air drying is used. You have to very gently apply the ink and not become, very slap happy, dab it very generously, because that will cause seepage of the ink into the specimen. As you remember, in the breast, there are no, inside the breast, when you're having a wide extent specimen, there are no facial planes inside. So if you put it with a heavy hand, you will end up introducing ink into the specimen in between the fat lobules, which will create false margin. So be a little gentle, and you have to have some amount of guesstimate where one margin will be ending and another will be beginning. So if your wide excision that you're receiving, your surgeon is oriented, they kind of take it out instead of like a ball. They do try to these days try to take it out in some kind of a cube or a rectangle, so that it is easier for you to make out that this is where this margin is ending, the other is beginning. But if not, there is some amount of guesstimate that will have to be there. And the different, if you're using single black coloring, then you have to make sure that, when you're sampling, each margin is given separately, because you will not be able to identify on section which margin is which side. But if you are using multiple colorings, you can have a kind of a set, you can have mixture of different types of colors that you use for particular direction, so that even if you forget to mention it on the form, if somebody sees, if you use this convention, if somebody sees blue, they know that it is for the superior. If somebody sees green, they know it is for inferior. So that way you can have a convention in your own hospital that this is the way we are going to ink, and this will convey this regardless of whether it is mentioned on the form or not. If of course it is not a routine protocol, please do mention it on the form. So this is what the specimen you had, and you have identified the margins and you have colored them separately in this way. And so now what will you do? You will seriously slice the specimen from medial to lateral, from the posterior aspect. And usually for smaller specimens like wide excision, you should use 5 millimeter thick slices only. They should be of uniform thickness. How does that help? That if it is of uniform 5 millimeter thickness, if you have the tumor in say 3 slices, you can say that it is 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, so 1.5 centimeter medial to lateral dimension of the tumor. So that is easier for you to give a gross size in 3 dimension. So this is how you will serially slice it. In this photo, the slices have all been separated out, but at this point, when the specimen is not fixed, you should try to maintain the attachment of the tumor from one aspect and slice it from posteriorly and anteriorly. Try to maintain the attachment of the tumor so you can orient it again the next day. And after you have serially sliced it, you have to put in between the slices the cotton swabs that are dipped in formalin and place it between the slices. And as I said, you have to put it in adequate amount of fixative and keep it for the next day. So this brings me to the first MCQ. Geeta, will you take over?
Yeah. So the first question is, for wide excision, all the following are true except serially section the specimen at the deep surface from medial to lateral or lateral to medial. Option B, do not cut all the way through. Option C, most important reporting parameter is margin status. Option D, even in case of discrepancies with the orientation or laterality, grossing should not be delayed. You all can answer in the chat box itself.
Most of them are giving D as the answer, ma'am.
Yeah, so this was just to make sure that I have not put everybody to sleep and the people are following along with the PPT. So good. Yes, it is the first three I've already explained. And of course, even if there is any kind of discrepancy, you should always, especially orientation as well as laterality, I forgot to mention, you should give at least one single cut and put it in fixative rather than distorting the specimen by, completely cutting it through without knowing the orientation. So next day, after your specimen has been fixed, you are going to take the measurement. You try to take the measurement in 3 dimensions, the tumor in 3 dimensions, the distance from the overlying skin, the tumor size, location, especially if there is some kind of orientation or particularly which slice it is identified in, if it is relevant, distances from the margins, and any additional lesions if you identify in the surrounding breast, you have to mention that with the distances from the first tumor as well as from any the closest margins from the second lesion. And you have to also note any kind of calcification, clip or scar in the specimen. What is the importance of this? First of all, the importance of this is in the measurement of the tumor size. Now, pathologic measurement of the tumor size is the gold standard. Either it is on gross or on microscopy, it is the gold standard, and it is the basis on which you have the TNM staging. So the importance being that the T size, as you know, the TNM staging is used for prognosis as well as deciding the adjuvant therapy. If the tumor is large size, there is increased chance of involvement of the lymph nodes as well. And this is the AJCC staging that we all use. So if you have a tumor that is less than 2 centimeter, it is T1. If you have 2 to 5 centimeter, it is T2. And if it is more than 5 centimeter, it is T3. Or you should also remember that the extent of involvement, that is more relevant for MRM, but if the extent of involvement onto the chest wall or the skin comes in the criteria for the T4. So now you should also remember when you are taking the measurements by the scale, when you are at the cutoffs, that is 20 millimeter or this 1 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 5 to 10 millimeter for different T1 ABC, or between 20 millimeter but less than 50 millimeter for the T2. You try to be as accurate as possible and not very approximate. Okay, 2 centimeter, okay, 5 centimeter. No, try to see if you can make it, if it is possible to give 4.9 or 5.1 rather than an approximate size of 5 centimeter, because even though these cutoffs are non-overlapping, it is a bit more relevant at the cutoff points that you take the measurement accurately. Also, you have to remember what is the definition for the T size. Now, T size, this criteria of size applies to the largest tumor. So you might have multiple tumor, but the T size criteria is for the largest invasive tumor present in the specimen. It is not applicable for the DCIs. It is for the invasive carcinoma. So if you have a tumor with a large amount of DCIs around it, so you will have to give the T sizes based on the invasive carcinoma. If you are able to identify it on gross that this is DCIs, this is the invasive carcinoma, you give the size, fine. But if you give on the gross, if you're not able to delineate the DCIs from the invasive carcinoma and give a total size, that is also fine, because as we see subsequently, you will be able to reconstruct it on the microscopy. But you can make it a point to mention that some foci of DCIs are seen around if you're able to identify them on gross, and then the T size can be seen on the microscopy. So what happens when you have multiple tumors? It is taken by convention that if two tumors are, within 5 millimeters of each other, you're seeing two nodules, but they have the same histology and they are within 5 millimeters of each other, they are likely to be the same tumor. So the T size should include, if they are close by, the T size of the invasive carcinoma should include from one end of the one tumor to the other. Why? Because in 3 dimensions, it might be that the tumor is connected somewhere at some part. So it is taken by convention. There is no kind of it has just been as a convention, it has been taken that if they are within 5 millimeter and the same histology, you should take it as one tumor. And if it is more than 5 millimeter away, then it has to be taken as multiple tumor, and the size of the largest tumor is the only one which will undergo for the T staging and the TNM staging. The next important parameter is the sampling of margins. So what we do in when the tumor is close or less than 1 centimeter away from the margin, we should take the radial margin, which includes the tumor and the margin along with the relevant colored ink. And it is very important in this that especially if you have not used multiple colorings, you are using only black ink, then at least each section of the tumor should have a separate section with the relevant margin. And you cannot have multiple margin in the same section in such a scenario when only one color ink is used. If you are using multiple colorings, then you can have 2 or even 3 or even 4 different ink in the same section so that you are able to identify. But if you are using same coloring, then each section of each margin has to be given separately with the tumor. And this radial margins are important because when the tumor is close, you might have infiltrating cells that are coming close to one of the margin or involving it. So you can see the distance of you can measure the distance of the tumor from the relevant margin if you have given a radial margin. What happens in a shave margin? You are giving, you are coloring the specimen and you are giving the specimen the cuts like this, a kind of a vertical cut through and through to give a shave margin. So in this, the margin is embedded in a manner in that this ink will be at the periphery. From all the sides, you're going to have ink at the periphery. And if there is any kind of tumor present in this margin, in the section, that microscopic section, then it will be considered a positive margin. Now the difference between shave and radial margin is that here you will not be able to measure the distance of the tumor, because this part where the tumor is present here, but this part, this distance, you will not be able to measure because it will be embedded in a N-face manner. So you will only be able to see the tumor at the center and some amount of ink at the periphery. That is why any presence of any tumor in a shave margin is considered a positive margin. So it is important when you are giving the sections to mention that this particular margin have been sampled in a radial manner or a shave manner, because your interpretation will differ. And in a radial margin, you can measure the distance, while in a shave margin, the distance cannot be measured. Now, the third type of specimen you can get is a cavity shave margin, whereby the surgeon, after taking out the lumpectomy, he has taken out the shaves of different, the cavity walls of the specimen and marked them. The outermost part is generally the one where they push the stitch. And this also you can ink from the periphery, from the outermost side. And also you can, in this way, if you serially slice them and embed them radially, then you can convert a shave margin into a radial margin. So again, if you can serially slice it and embed it, then you can have a tumor and you can measure the distance to the margin. So just to show you what this means. So if you have a specimen like this and it is far away from the margin, then this margin you can give as a shave margin. And but if it is close, in such as these two areas here, if you give a radial margin, you can actually measure the distance of the tumor from the margin and give accurate distances. And as I said, you have to give one section per margin. You can give more if you think that this particular margin is closed and my first section that I gave did not, reach the closest area. You can give more section of the margin of one particular direction if you want, as long as you indicate that it has been given this way. And this is just how a shave margin would look. It is just a vertical chop of the specimen, and you can convert it into a shave, convert it into radial by giving slices of it. Or if you embed it completely end face, then it is going to have ink on a kind of periphery all around. And this is a radial margin, whereby you can see that two inks are there, red and blue, both given in the same section. And if on the section, you will be able to measure the distance of the tumor from the margins accurately. So what is importance of margins here? They are predictor of local recurrence, and if the margin is positive, the clinician might decide to undertake a re-excision of the specimen, or obviously radiation therapy has to be definitely given, but they also might decide to add CTRT, the chemotherapy also. The definition of positive margin that is taken is any tumor on the ink surface involving the ink surface. And it is not mandatory, but it is recommended that you can give the distances of the margin from the tumor. Like you can mention that it is a closed margin within 5 millimeter. It may be it should be documented. It might impact on the decision of the clinician for doing a revision or a mastectomy, but it is not considered a positive margin. It is it is not mandatory, but you can mention it that it is a closed margin. Now, for DCIS, the criteria of margin close, positive margin is different. 2 millimeters is the distance that is used to consider adequate DCIS, that is more than 2 millimeter away, is considered an adequate margin, not positive. And it is known that due to pattern involvement of DCIS, it does not guarantee absence of DCIS in the adjacent tissue. There might be skip lesion, it is well known, but that is why for DCIS, a 2 millimeter margin is considered adequate. Now, again, it is not mandatory, but you can give the approximate extent of the margin involvement, whether it is unifocal, multifocal, or extensively it is involving the margin. So this again helps the clinician in taking decisions that do they want to go for re-excision or not. But as of now, these are not mandatory parameters as per the guidelines. But if you mention all this, it is helpful for the clinician. Now, how can you, there can be chances of margin errors, because as you know, the specimen many times when it comes to the OT, and by the time we get it, it gets flattened and loses height, or it might even lose its orientation from OT to the grossing table. So these are the known fallacies where you can have a problem with the margins. So orientation, of course, as I said, you have to call the surgeon and get the orientation proper before you do the grossing. And for flattening out, there is, not much can be done. The only thing is that if it is properly sent and, received in the lab fast, and then your grossing and everything happens, the fixation at least happens the same day, then it is unlikely to happen, because then it might, if it is kept for a long time in the packet without any proper fixative, then there are chances of getting flattened. So this brings to the second MCQ.
So the second MCQ is observe the above microscopic images. Which of the above is a positive margin? Is it image 1 or image 2 or both or none? You may answer in the chat box.
Mostly they are giving one as the answer, ma'am. And few see both.
Yeah.
Very few.
So yes, so those who are giving one, that is correct. Definitely you can see here that there is tumor directly sitting at the ink. So this is a positive margin. What you see here, there is tumor, but these are LVI. These are lymphovascular emboli. So this would not be considered a positive margin, even if the LVI are sitting right at the margin. They are emboli. That means their tumor is spreading beyond the margin of the specimen. So in any case, it is spread beyond. So it is not, the margin is for the for the presence of invasive tumor or DCIS, not for LVI. And even if suppose this was invasive tumor, there is a healthy distance, at least 1 millimeter between here and this cauterized surface or the margin, ink margin, if you can see. So there is a distance in between. So this would not be a positive margin. Positive margin is tumor at the ink. This would be a close margin that you can mention if it is an invasive tumor here, that it is 1 millimeter away, but it is not a positive margin. Margin will be considered free. So next component that you have to mention for which grossing adequately is important is presence of extensive intrarectal component. Now the definition of extensive intrarectal component is DCIS forming more than 25% of the area within the invasive carcinoma and not or and DCIS present outside the area of invasive carcinoma. There is another definition of EIC that is predominantly DCIS associated with a small, approximately 10 mm or less, invasive carcinoma or multiple carcinomas, but that is predominantly DCIS with small foci of invasion and DCIS within more than 25% within invasive carcinoma and present around the invasive carcinoma. So why am I telling this here? These are microscopic definitions. The relevance being that it is when you are sampling, taking sections, your tumor section should always be with the surrounding area so that you are able to identify EIC. You will not be able to identify it or give the definition or give the diagnosis of EIC if you have taken sections only from the tumor without much surrounding area. Now, EIC is a crucial factor for recurrence in patients treated with BCS, and the tumor section need to be taken with the adjacent breast to document EIC. Similarly, lymphovascular invasion. Lymphovascular invasion implies that the carcinoma cells are present within the endothelial space and is also a significant predictor of local and distant recurrence. Now, the criteria of LVI are predominantly the same as what you have in the rest of the body, but you have to remember that it must be present outside the border of invasive carcinoma, peritumoral LVI, which is relevant, and so it is at least 1 millimeter away from the tumor. So again, you need to sample the tumor with the surrounding breast tissue. So that brings me to the sampling of the wide excision that we had seen earlier. So how do you sample it? You take the slice of the longest dimension of the tumor and take it in a grid manner, so that you are kind of taking, see, as you can see here, all the sections are, tumor sections are with the adjacent breast, surrounding rim of adjacent breast, and include whatever the relevant most closest margin that you can take radially. Along with that, you have to include the, if it is a small tumor, less than 2 centimeter, you can submit it entirely. But if it is a large tumor, at least one kind of cross-section grid of the tumor, which will help us in T-size reconstruction microscopically if required, along with the specimen of, along with sections carrying adjacent breast and any closest relevant radial margins. Besides this, you can have the other margins that are far off. You can take them and in a shave manner, or make the shave into a radial margin by slicing them horizontally. Then you also, from the adjacent slices, in one cross section, largest cross section you have taken as a grid, from the adjacent slices also you can take at least one section, minimum being 1 centimeter, one section per centimeter of the tumor. So how to reproduce this on the so that the person who's seeing the slide or the microscopy is able to orient what you have seen and how you have taken a gross. You make a nice diagram of the slice that you are processing. You draw the tumor and whatever nearest closest margins that you have taken, orient it and write that, like, this is with this margin, this section is section number is with this margin, and you can identify here also. You can give the distances if you want, but if not, at least from your diagram it will be close to understood by the people who are seeing the slide, that how close the tumor was to the relevant margins. Also, what is T-size reconstruction? Now, this is the one of the diagrams is given by one of our students, that they said that the sections 0 to 4, they did not identify any tumor, but in this section, they have section number 5, 6, they drew that what they thought was a tumor, and they have sliced it this way. So now this is section number 5 and 6. So in this is the way the diagram was made, but when your technologist is taking the section on the slide, they might not use the same orientation as has been made in the diagram. They will take the orientation which is best for picking up the section from the water bath onto the slide. But with the help of this diagram, you will be able to place the section adjacent to each other and reconstruct the orientation of the tumor as per the section, and in this manner you can join the tumor together and in different sections and take a maximum T size. This is what is known as T size reconstruction, for which taking the tumor sections in a grid and making the orientation in a diagram, you do not require fancy photography equipment. You can directly make a nice grid diagram orienting the tumor as per the size that the section that you have taken, mark any margins that you have seen within this within the diagram, and then it can be reconstructed very nicely. Looking at your diagram, the slides can be placed next to each other and the T size reconstruction can be done. Wire localized excision, now I understand that this is not a specimen that majority of you will be seeing on a routine basis, but I'm just orienting you that how this is different and how it has to be grossed differently. So this wire localized excision is usually done for non-palpable abnormalities which are identified in radiology. These days, increasingly, the patients are going for, the screening mammography as part of packages that are offered by various as part of their insurance, as part of the company they are working, they're supposed to get yearly scans done. So they are going for screening mammography, which kind of sometimes ends up picking up lesions which are not palpable, for which the patient is not symptomatic. So they can be like non-palpable tumors, they can be DCIS, calcification, radial scars, papillary lesion. So how does the surgeon operate a specimen? They insert a wire into the lesion under mammographic guidance, and subsequently this wire is kept in situ and sent by the radiologist and sent to the surgery, where the surgeon will keep the wire in the center and operate around it. Because if the thing is non-palpable, even surgeon can't feel it, and so they have to operate keeping the wire as a guidance. So distal part of the wire will be in the lesion and proximal will be out of the specimen, and this is what the specimen you will receive. So how do you gross it? Basically, since it has been, if it is not palpable to the patient, to the surgeon, then it might not be palpable to you also, and when you're grossing it. So in the same inking procedure and everything is the same as has been done for the wire excision. You will serially slice it and you will keep the wire in it with the slice that you identified it on the gross, and take it to the radiography room with keeping the slices in a proper orientation from, say, medial to lateral. You keep the slices in a proper orientation and take it to the radiography room, whereby the radiologist will do a radiography and identify that, okay, this is the abnormality that we saw is present in this and this slice. So you know that this is where I have to sample. You can also keep a wire next to the slide so that they can, that this was the wire that I received, and document that, yes, we received a wire along with it, and the radiological, so that you remember that this is the slice. Like here, you can keep the wire so that this is the slice identified in radiology. If you are able to identify the lesion on the gross examination, fine, you can give distances, but at least you will know which slice the abnormality was found in, and that slice you can properly sample. So this is just to orient you that this is the slice that was identified as abnormal. It was a kind of a grayish white lesion was identified on gross, and proper distances were given, and that particular slice with the lesion is submitted entirely with the proper grid diagram, so you can reconstruct the T size on microscopy. Now this brings us to mastectomy. So mastectomy, again, you have to first, before you start grossing, besides the other points I have mentioned, you have to start orienting. You have to keep the axillary tail, if it is attached, on the lateral side. If it is not attached, the lateral side can be marked by the surgeon. And you have to start first by palpating the lesion and identifying the area where it is involved. So you have to examine the skin and the nipple areolar complex for any kind of scar, ulceration, puckering, retraction, inversion, puree orange appearance. You might, if it is a recent biopsy, you might even find the biopsy stitch in an area that indicates to you, okay, this is where the biopsy was taken, so the tumor is most likely going to be below this lesion. You have to measure the skin and the dimension of the breast. So this is the appearance of puree orange. Actually, many times by the time the specimen gets to the lab, this is because of edema in the in the dermis. So you might not get this classical appearance. This might is mostly in the fresh state. But so because of over time, this kind of edema can get dissipated. So you might not see classical puree orange. But yes, some amount of puckering and retraction might be there. This kind of specimen also with huge amount of ulceration and everything also sometimes you get. you have to be careful to check the nipple areolar complex for any kind of abnormality, because this is a smaller area. You might have some amount of ulceration, excoriation, and you can even have the complete destruction or retraction of the nipple. So after you have identified the abnormalities on the skin and everything, now you turn the specimen over and you have to ink the base or the posterior margin. Now, most of the time, if it is lifted off as a simple mastectomy, you are going to have some amount of facial plane, which is little smoother than the raw area of the axilla. So you will be able to identify this kind of smooth facial plane, and you are supposed to ink the facial plane of the breast, not of the axilla. So the axilla at this point, after you have inked, you can either separate or you can keep it intact as long as you slice it properly. And then you have to serially slice. Now, instead of the wire excision or the wide excision where you had slicing at 5 millimeter intervals, here you have to slice at 1 centimeter interval, because it's a bigger specimen. It is thicker. It is more difficult to cut. You have to have a very sharp knife. You should be able to give cuts because it is a fatty specimen. If you have a blunt knife, you're going to create multiple cuts, and not going to very uneven slices are going to be there. Again, you will not be able to reconstruct the size after, if you have properly thick 1 centimeter sizes, you can reconstruct the gross size in the third dimension. So you have to have equal the spacing of the slices and a nice sharp long knife to be able to cut through this fatty specimen. And again, after cutting, you have to keep the slices separated by the gauze, the swab soaked in formalin. And again, importantly, put it in adequate amount of fixative in a container that is appropriate for the size of the specimen that you are grossing. So once you have the slices that is properly fixed, you can either cut through the whole slices or you can keep from the skin surface intact. You have to identify the location of the tumor, which quadrant it is in, the size, the shape, that is whether it is circumscribed, it is stellate, it has pushing borders, the color, consistency, whether it is soft, firm, hard, solid, cystic, the border. You describe the tumor properly. The same applies for wide excision, but I'm mentioning more here because mastectomy is a more frequently received specimen in majority of the centers. You have to mention the distances from the skin, the distance of the tumor from the nipple areolar complex, from the base or the posterior margin, and distance from any additional lesions that you identify in the breast, and any calcification. Now, you also need to know if the patient has undergone any prior biopsy, any kind of lumpectomy. So if there is any cavity of that, you have to identify and describe its size, appearance, location, and any other residual tumor alongside the cavity. Besides this, please do also check for other lesions in the breast in the adjacent parenchyma. And how do you give the section from the NSC? You give a vertical slice through the middle of the NSC, like you can see, so that you can, if you give 2 such parallel vertical slices, you will be able to get the NAC right from the top to the muscle layer at the bottom and some amount of tissue below it. Give 2 nice parallel sharp cuts with the scalpel, not with the large knife you use to do the fixation with. So with the scalpel, give nice 2 parallel cuts and go deep so that you are able to get the complete NAC from top to the bottom, including the muscle layer and some amount of tissue below it. So this brings to the third MCQ.
Regarding mastectomy, all of the following are true except A. Medial lateral dimension of MRM includes axillary tail. B. If axillary tail present, no need to ink axillary tail tissue. C. Ink mastectomy prior to removing the axillary tail. D. Even if no axillary tail is present, try and palpate the upper outer quadrant for lymph nodes. Students, you can type in the chat box. Most of them are giving A and few are giving C as answer, ma'am.
Yeah, so A is correct because the question was which is true except. So the first is false, that is the medial lateral dimension includes the axillary tail. What you're supposed to give the dimension is only of the breast without the axillary tail. If the axillary tail is present, of course, you do not need to ink it because that is not the margin. Axilla is not a margin. The deep surface of the breast is the margin. Okay. And if there is you have to ink the mastectomy prior to removing the axillary tail. Ink the base properly before you're able, so that you can make out where the mastectomy ends and the axilla begins. And that is a good guide for you to know which is your deep resection surface. And even if no axillary tissue is present, you have to try to palpate the upper outer quadrant, what you can make out from the specimen, which is the upper outer quadrant, or if it has been marked by the surgeon, because you might have some amount of lymph nodes there. And it is essential that even if you cannot identify any axilla, you try to give sections from the upper outer quadrant, because you will pick out lymph nodes from there. So just moving on with the other lesions that you can see in a mastectomy or the breast drossing, what you can see is sometimes you can make out DCIs separately. As I said previously, sometimes you might not be able to make out DCIs separate from the tumor, invasive tumor. But in certain cases, when it is, that Komedo type of typical DCIs, you can see rounded nodular structures in which you can have this kind of chalky white areas of calcification. So this is what is known as palpable DCIs. High-grade DCIs with Komedo necrosis, you have calcification, white to yellow flecks. It is gritty to cut. Because of the calcification and the Komedo necrosis, it is going to be gritty to cut. And when if pressed, this kind of, if there is not calcified or this thing, it can extrude out from the surface from the rounded nodular lesion. So this is what pure DCIs looks like on gross. Also, you have to remember that, as I said, you have to describe the lesion, whether it is, circumscribed, infiltrative, stellate. So most of the time, the stellate lesions or the radial kind of radiating lesions, they are usually malignant carcinoma, but there are few benign exceptions such as fat necrosis, radial scar, microglandular adenosis, or rarely granular cell tumor. And most of the time, your well circumscribed lobulated lesions are going to be benign, like fibroadenomas. But you can also have various grades of phyllodes which are well circumscribed. And then you can have some malignant lesions such as papillary carcinoma, medullary carcinoma. They can be malignant, but which are well circumscribed. Then you have lesions which are accompanied by cystic change, benign, usually fibrocystic change will have cystic this thing. But also you can have some kind of invasive carcinomas, which are mostly triple negative, which have kind of hemorrhagic central cystic lesions. So that is why describing the gross and correlating that with the microscopy is important. So this is another small specimen of enucleation to show you the well circumscribed encapsulated tumor, which is which has a nice fleshy surface with slit-like spaces. Of course, this is a fibroadenoma. In contrast, you can have another this well circumscribed lesion which is not encapsulated, which has nodular pushing margins, and as you can see, it is forming nodules even on the surface of the skin. This is of course most likely, looking at the fleshy appearance, it is rather than a carcinoma, it is likely to be a Phyllodes tumor. So you can make a gross diagnosis right here that it is, I'm looking at possibly a Phyllodes tumor or a sarcoma of the breast, not a carcinoma. Now, this is the typical appearance of a carcinoma. You can have this kind of areas of necrosis, heterogeneity, and areas of hemorrhage. And in contrast, this is a typical fibrocystic area where you have this kind of a glistening appearance, as well as you have multiple variably sized cystic spaces, but more homogeneous than this kind of appearance. Now, in many times in a mastectomy, you are going to see this kind of appearance where you cannot make out, is this an infiltrative tumor? It is not having well circumscribed margin. It is not cystic, but still it is sometimes what fibrocystic appearance looks like. So how will you differentiate it from carcinoma? You have to palpate. So with the help of palpation, you might find an otherwise hard feeling invasive carcinoma in the background of what looks like a completely fibrocystic disease. So I would like you, all of you, that if you go back and gross a breast specimen and palpate the slices next time, just close your eyes and feel with your fingers, see with your fingers that what a fibrocystic feels like, rubbery appearance, which will have some amount of give within your finger, as contrast to an invasive carcinoma, which is going to be really hard to feel, and it will not give below your fingers. So this is mostly applicable for upfront specimen. In post-chemo specimen, the situation might be different, but you do go back and palpate that whether you can make out, close your eyes and palpate that this is what a carcinoma will look like, this is feel like, and this is what a fibrocystic will feel like. I'm telling you, this is going to save you many times when you end up sampling a lot of fibrocystic disease and no invasive carcinoma. So palpate the slices and you, in between your fingers, press between your fingers, and you'll be able to find out what the consistency of a carcinoma is compared to fibrocystic disease. Now, another very important feature is presence of multifocal tumors for which obviously many times a mastectomy is done rather than wide excision. So what is the difference between multifocal and multicentric? If you have tumors that are more than 5 millimeter apart within the same quadrant, it is multifocal, and if they are more than 5 centimeter apart in different quadrant, it's multicentric. Now again, as I said, these quadrants are artifactual, they are man-made, they are not there anatomically. So more important than the the quadrant is this distance measurement. So if it is more than 5 millimeter apart but less than 5 centimeter, multiple lesions are multifocal. But if they are more than 5 centimeter apart, they are multicentric. The importance being that this identification of multifocality or multicentricity, it is required for planning of the radiation after the surgery, and it is very effective in reducing local recurrences because multicentric tumors have a higher propensity for recurrence than unifocal. Now, increasingly these days, we are identifying MRMs with multifocal tumors. It is a practice, the observation that I have seen at my institute, it might be there at your institute also, that in the MRM, you are many times it is being operated for multicentricity. The radiological facilities are becoming better and better. So more and more, rather than one single lesions, when the patient undergoes radiological evaluation for the tumor, they identify with the increased sensitivity of different radiological modalities. They identify small lesions here and there in the breast, which sometimes they are able to say that, okay, this is a second malignancy, but many times they say there are another lesion here, this much centimeter away, another lesion in that direction, this much centimeter away, and then there is a main tumor. So our job as a pathologist is to keep that information in front of us when we are doing the grossing, to orient the breast in that manner so that you are able to identify those multifocal lesions and sample them also along with your main tumor. And how do you sample the multifocal lesions? If it is they are very close by, just barely 0.5 centimeter apart, you can take the both lesions in the same section and with some amount of intervening parenchyma, but I would not recommend this except for very close tumors. Generally, what you should try to do is, if there is adequate distance between them, and if you are able to take a perpendicular section between the two sections, between the two tumors, a perpendicular section, so that you can maximally sample the area in the cross section of the area in between the two tumors. So how is that relevant? So if you have two tumors of different sizes, and you have taken an intervening section that is at perpendicular angle, sample the maximum area in between the two tumors, and there is no tumor identified in the intervening parenchyma, then it will be staged as a multifocal disease with the T size being of the largest tumor, that is the staging size, but you will be calling it at M. In AJCC staging, prefix of M indicating multifocal disease can be given, that is MTNM. But if you have a tumor that is in somehow in 3 dimensions, that both the tumor what you identified on gross as 2 different tumors, they are connected somewhere somehow in 3 dimensions, and you have taken the intervening parenchyma which shows a tumor, then your final T size, it is not staged as multifocal disease, but your final T size will become this size of the first size of the first tumor, size of the second tumor, as well as the intervening distance. So the final T size will become quite huge, and then it is staged differently. So this is just to show you an example of diligent grossing, that a patient who underwent MRM was identified as having 2 lesions by our radiology. Even an MRI was done for some reason, and they identified 2 different lesions in different quadrant. There was one tumor in the upper outer quadrant, one in the lower inner quadrant, and there was a healthy 10.5 centimeter distance between them. While grossing, a resident also identified another tumor in the retroareolar region, which was, and again the proper distances were mapped and given in the grid diagram, that this is this much 3.5 centimeter away from this tumor, and also they identified another lesion in the same upper outer quadrant, which this was not a malignant lesion, this was a fibroid node, but they identified it and again gave the intervening distance and any other relevant intervening distance between the various tumors. So this way you have to map and make the diagram of your tumors that you have given, and in this case the intervening parenchyma, as you can see, in between all the tumors was negative, so it becomes a multicentric tumor, and the largest size in this case was of the T1 tumor. So it is staged as T1 but multicentric. Now, this is another example wherein there were 2 lesions identified on the radiology and they were considered separate. But when we took the sections, there is a tumor here, there is a tumor here, but the intervening is also showing an invasive tumor. So now the T size becomes the size of this plus this as well as this, and it is now a large T size tumor. Now, I would here like to remind you that if radiologically they have identified and described multifocal tumors, it is important for you as a pathologist to give this to identify this, because identify the various lesions and try to orient it as per the radiology and try to identify on gross if you can identify something besides the main tumor that is looking different, that is looking something that can be has been identified that has the similar size as what other lesions have been identified on radiology, and give the sections not only because of, yes, of course, it is important for calling it multifocal, it is important for calling it intervening, but because also many times the decision where the patient is undergoing a mastectomy is because the lesions have been called multifocal on the radiology. So it is a kind of confirmation to the surgeon, to the patient, as well as to the radiologists who have identified the multiple lesions, that yes, they did turn out to be multifocal. So the decision of taking this as a mastectomy was correct. Many times, if you that either that information is not available, or you did not check for it, or you did not look for the multifocal lesion in spite of the radiology being available, the patient is never going to know whether they were multiple lesions. And once the specimen is done, if they don't get back to you that no, I have identified multifocal lesions, please go and look for it. When the specimen is grossed, it will you are never going to be able to, the patient is also always have a doubt on you as a pathologist, on the surgeon, and on the and as well as on the radiologist, that when they said they're multifocal, they did my mastectomy, but no, I don't know, the report says only one tumor. So it is very important. It is not something that okay, I have identified the the main tumor mass, so it is sufficient for me that patient has gotten staging and everything. No, you have to go back and identify the various lesion as they have been described, because that is a very big deciding factor in the surgery, as well as for the patient subsequent therapy, and for the patient to know that they took a correct decision. So now coming back to the sections that you take in the mastectomy, similar to the what you did in the wide excision, you are going to take one full grade cross section of the tumor with the adjacent breast, one section per centimeter of the tumor, and you have to take the base, the posterior margin. Nearly always you should try to take it radially, and any skeletal muscle, if you have identified on gross, you have to take a section through that also. If the tumor, now many times we get mastectomies where multiple sections have been taken from the skin, from different the surfaces on the superior surface, inferior surface. If is a proper mastectomy, MRM has been done, these sections, it is not as per guideline that you need to take any additional section or skin margins, unless the skin is there is Paget disease involvement, then you might take a closest skin margin. Or if if there is some kind of a huge ulcer that you see after serial slicing, that the tumor is very close to some margin, then you can ink that area and take. Otherwise, as per guideline, in a routine mastectomy, there is no requirement to take the multiple skin margins or multiple surfaces. The base is the most important margin that is there, and that has to be taken. Besides this, of course, as I said, you have to take the NAC, you have to take the overlying skin or any scar if present, and any other grossly identified or mammographically identified lesion. So what other specimen you are getting in mastectomy these days is, as I said, the skin sparing mastectomy. In this, you are going to have additional margins. Not this is not a typical MRM. You're going, or a simple mastectomy. You are going to have additional margins of the antero-superior and antero-inferior surface in addition to the base. So here, the skin has been removed, and it is important to document that this area is free of tumor. So how are you going to measure? The way you measure the base, you are going to take the distances of the tumor from the antero-superior and the antero-inferior margin and give it as far as possible in a radial margin, a radial way, the way you would give the base. So additional margins in a skin sparing mastectomy are going to be beside the base. You're going to have antero-superior and antero-inferior margin. Similarly, in a nipple sparing mastectomy, there is an additional margin of a retroareolar margin. So you have, the area where the nipple has been lifted off. As I said, there is a muscle that separates the nipple from the underlying breast. So you can have some amount of muscle fibers identified. If you know that this is a nipple sparing mastectomy, you have to really look hard for it and identify it, or it might be marked with the surgeon with a stitch. Sometimes surgeons might take the lesion area above this NAC and call it NAC undershave, which is they can give in frozen or they can send it separately. The significance being that if there is any kind of tumor identified in this area on the section you have taken, or in the NAC undershave that is sent by the surgeon, then this specimen, the surgery will have to be revised, and you have to take out additional tissue of the nipple areolar complex that has been left behind. So this kind of surgery is done only in the conditions where the surgeon is reasonably sure that the tumor is quite far away from the NAC and there is no in situ or invasive area around this NAC. If found later on, then the specimen has to undergo revision. So it is important, very important to give this kind of margin. So coming to completion mastectomy. Now this is a specimen that I see, kind of messed up very often. That is why I have kept this as a separate heading. So completion mastectomy usually occurs following a prior excision because either they were involved margins or there is a suspicion of residual or a recurrent tumor in the remaining breast after a prior surgery. So you have to check the history that was the margin ever reported as positive or whether it is for residual or recurrent. You can have different kind of specimens here, that if suppose a completion, the specimen, a lumpectomy has been done, it is sent for frozen, and in that the margins are reported either grossly or microscopically close or positive, then the surgeon might decide to abandon the conservative procedure and go for a completion mastectomy. So in that case, what are you going to have in the gross? You're going to have a specimen in which there is a fresh, huge gaping cavity in the skin as well as in the underlying breast in the specimen. Okay. And if it has been done subsequently after the histopath report of the lumpectomy was available and it said that there is some margin that is closed, then you might have a specimen in which you are going to have a sort of a healed scar, and then underlying which you have to search for positive margins or residual tumor. Or you can have a specimen in which there is a prior surgery has been done, but now there is either a occult or a large or clinically obvious large recurrence. So these are the various conditions where you can get a completion mastectomy, and you have to sample the specimen for residual tumor or recurrent tumor. So how do you sample? First of all, the scar in a fresh state, of course, you know that this is the specimen report that was given in the frozen, that this particular margin is closed or positive. So you have to orient the specimen in the same way, and you have to identify that this is the area where the margin has been reported close or positive. So that part of the cavity you have to identify and take multiple sections to look for residual tumor. But if it is a healed, prior surgery was done and it is now healed, then you might or might not see a clear-cut cavity. Then you might just see areas of fat necrosis, this kind of yellowish white areas. You might even see properly residual tumor or a recurrent tumor, but it will look slightly different, and it is generally below the area of the scar that is seen previously. So this is the kind of specimen you can have. You will have a scar on the top. So it is important for you to sample the scar, overlying scar, and trace. That scar is a good indicator that where you are going to have the prior surgical changes. So below the scar you can trace, you can either have a prior lumpectomy cavity or hemorrhagic granulation tissue or fat necrosis. So you have to sample the cavity walls entirely or any other residual lesion that you identify there. So how do you do that? You take sections from the wall of the cavity, focusing on the margins identified closed or involved on the excision, either in the frozen or in the paraffin. Sections have to be 2 times the largest dimension of the cavity. So if the cavity is 5 centimeter, at least 10 sections have to be sampled from different areas of the wall. And if you are not identifying any cavity, check the location of the lumpectomy from the radiology, that whether they took it in, the upper outer, upper inner, whatever quadrant they took it from, and you have to take sections around that area and try to orient with the help of scar. Sometimes in old specimen, the scar might be difficult to identify. Stretch the skin and see if you can make out any kind of abnormality on the skin. The scar might not be very apparent or obvious. It might get healed, especially if it is a few years or prior surgery was done. So you have to stretch the skin and identify the scar. Also, again, you have to remember that not to forget at all that you have to look for additional specimen. Sometimes the original cavity might not have any residual tumor or any recurrent tumor around it, but away from it, there is now a new recurrence. So you have to sample both the original cavity as well as the new lesion that you can see. And again, take the intervening area. So this brings us to the examination of the grossing of the regional lymph node. Now the regional lymph nodes in the breast are the level 1 lymph node, that is lateral to the pectoralis minor muscle, those that are behind, that is level 2, and those that are medial to the pectoralis muscle, that is level 3. Most of the time you get level 1 and level 2 muscles, and level 3 only if the clinician is suspecting involvement. The other nodes you can have are internal mammary nodes, supraclavicular or infraclavicular nodes, which are also the draining lymph node of the breast. Any nodes beside this, even of the opposite side axilla, will be considered as distant metastasis. So what are the type of specimen you receive in the regional lymph node? You get sentinel lymph nodes, which are intraoperatively identified using a dye or radio tracer. You can get that for frozen as well as for main grossing, or you can get low axillary sampling, in which they just anatomically sample the level 1 fat for the largest nodes by palpating intraoperatively. There is no dye that is used or radio tracer, hence it is cost effective. It is done in a lot of centers across India. And of course, you can have the full complete axillary clearance and with separate specimen of other nodes as relevant. So how do you gross it? After you have, removed the specimen from the mastectomy, you have to serially slice it medial to lateral, fix it as you would a mastectomy specimen. And then once the nodes become firm, you have to dissect the nodes and record the number of nodes identified along with the size of the largest node and its cut surface. Now, minimum criteria is 10 lymph node, but it is minimum. It is not the maximum. So please, you have to sample as many nodes as possible. The end staging, you can, 3 out of 6 nodes is not the same relevance as 3 out of 15 nodes. You understand? So it is, you have to try to sample as many, palpate well, fix the axilla well, palpate. Again, your fingers have to become your eyes, and you have to identify the lymph node. If you are not identify lymph node, then then besides the nodes that you have identified, try to sample the axillary fat in a little bit extensive manner to confirm, because sometimes these nodes can be microscopic. You can have 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter nodes, which you are not able to palpate, especially if the specimen is not fixed. So please sample the axillary fat if you're not able to identify node, but don't just let it go at 5 nodes identified and 5 node process. No, sample additional tissue if you're not able to identify it grossly. So how do you gross the lymph nodes, especially if it is a smaller, if it's a single node, sentinel node, you have to bisect and serially slice it at 2 millimeter intervals and submit the sections entirely. One section for one lymph node. But if it is like small single less than 5 millimeter node, just bisect and submit the entire node in one section. But you have to mention in your grossing grossing page that this is a bisected node. Otherwise, it will be on the microscopy, it will appear like 2 separate nodes and counted as 2 nodes. So you have to mention on the form that in this particular section, I have given bisected node. In this particular section, I have given 2 nodes, 3 nodes, 5 nodes. Or in this particular section, I have seriously sliced and chopped what I felt was a large node could be positive. So you have chopped the entire node at 2 millimeter intervals and given, so that they are not counted as multiple nodes at the time of seeing on the slide. It's also important to remember that do not strip the lymph node of the perinodal fat, because extranodal extension is a important feature for deciding radiation to the axilla. So that you can only document once you have given the section with the perinodal. Some amount of perinodal fat has to be there to be able to identify extranodal extension. If it is a large grossly positive node, one section through the full face of the metastasis with what you can grossly identified extranodal extension is enough. But if it is a large node which is not having any grossly available metastasis, then sampling it in multiple sections through it is important. So it's again the significance being, this is the first station for metastasis and the single most important prognostic factor that influences the adjuvant therapy decisions and prognosis. So you have to document the total number of nodes in the gross and the total number of nodes that are showing gross metastasis, which can get obviously modified on the microscopic examination. And the significance again with the large size of metastasis more than 10 mm predicts the risk for non-sentinel lymph node involvement. So they are more likely to be, if it's a more than 1 centimeter metastasis, it is likely that there are going to be more metastasis. So accordingly, the clinician can take the decision. Presence of extranodal extension more than 2 mm is associated generally with N2 disease, and hence it predicts the risk of higher number of positive nodes. So again, the size of the, how do you take the size of the metastatic focus? You have to take the size as per as per AJCCs. As I said, in the main tumor, you have to take the size for the largest contiguous focus, the way you are doing in the breast, the same way you have to do in the lymph node, that you have to take the largest contiguous focus, whether it is present in the lymph node, whether it is present outside the lymph node. And when it is present in a multiple scattered foci, then the whole complete size becomes, of the lymph node becomes the T size. Also, it is important to remember that the tumor may be present only in the axillary fat. And if it is more than 3 mm without the lymphoid tissue around it also, it has to be, in the breast, it has to be counted as a lymph node metastasis with extranodal extension. So this becomes extranodal extension if you are seeing only a soft tissue deposit. Some people count the node separately and soft tissue deposit separately, but no, as per criteria, as per guideline in the breast, if it is present even in the soft tissue, it is more than 3 mm, even if there is no lymphoid tissue around it, it has to be counted as a nodal metastasis with extranodal extension. Also, there are some guidelines given that if it is more than 2 mm, it has to be counted as macro metastasis, and micro if it is 0.2 to 2 mm, and isolated tumor cell clusters if it is either less than 0.2 mm or 200 cells. The significance being that the end stage is for the macro and the micro metastasis. The ITC you can document, but it is not counted in the total end staging, the number of nodes positive. So accordingly, you have to give, and also this is the reason why you have the slicing of the node at 2 mm intervals, so you do not miss out on micrometastasis. So this brings me to the fourth MCQ.
Following is true about staging of nodal metastasis in breast cancer. A. Intramammary node involvement is not staged. B. Supraclavicular node is staged as distant metastasis. C. Ipsilateral internal mammary node is staged as regional nodal metastasis. D. All of the above. E. None of the above. Mostly they are giving D as the answer, but all the answers they are typing in the
Yeah.
chat.
So in this case, the only thing true is C, that the ipsilateral internal mammary node is staged as a regional nodal metastasis. As I said, internal mammary node is one of the draining nodes of the breast. So the same side internal mammary node would be staged as a regional nodal metastasis. If it is the opposite side, it would be staged as distant metastasis. Then supraclavicular node also, as I said, it is the draining lymph node of the same side. It is a draining lymph node of the breast. So it is not staged as a distant metastasis. But cervical lymph node would be staged as a distant metastasis. Intramammary node here, I have got it specifically because many times people don't consider this as a nodal, do not stage it as a nodal involvement at all. They mention that, okay, one intramammary node identified. But intramammary node is basically a type of sentinel lymph node. That is the first draining lymph node of the breast. If it is involved, that indicates that the tumor is spread to the lymph node, even if it is present intramammary. So most of these intramammary nodes are actually towards the upper outer quadrant. So it is basically a kind of a spread beyond the tumor and involving a lymph node. So if the intramammary node is involved, it will be staged as the involvement of a regional lymph node. So it will be given a count of 1 lymph node positive. So just again, because these days the post-neoadjuvant chemotherapy is being given increasing, the neoadjuvant therapy is being given increasingly, and you are going to have specimen even as when you start working independently, you are going to have increasingly see a lot of specimen that have come to you after a patient has received neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So I'll be covering the assessment of post neoadjuvant therapy specimen in brief. They can be both lumpectomy as well as mastectomy. So when is the neoadjuvant chemotherapy given? It is given to patients who are either locally advanced or large operable cancers, and more recently, even early high risk cancers such as TNBC or HER2 positive are being given neoadjuvant chemotherapy. The significance being that for the surgeon, it improves the operability, enhances the local control. The tumor shrinks with the chemotherapy, so the operability of the patient improves. It downsizes the tumor. That conservative surgery, they would have otherwise thought it's a large tumor, let us do a mastectomy. But with the help of shrinkage of the tumor with the neoadjuvant chemotherapy, it downsizes the tumor that the patient can undergo a conservative surgery. So that is why sometimes patient also opt for neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by the surgery. Besides this, what is important is that the response is an excellent predictor of outcome of the patient. And it is for example, if you have a poor response, it provides opportunity for supplementary or alternative therapy. And if there's a good response, you can continue the same therapy if required in an adjuvant setting. Besides this, it is also required for assessment of in vivo drug sensitivity, how sensitive it is to the tumor, especially if a new chemotherapy regimen is started. As per the FDA, the complete pathological response is accepted as a criteria for approval of novel drugs. For all these particular regions, it is important to document the pathological response. And who does that documentation? Now, clinical documentation has never, even clinical as well as radiological documentation has not correlated well with complete response on pathology. Even in as high as 80% of patients who are thought to have clinical remission or radiological remission have residual microscopic disease. And many of the patients in which there is clinical suspected residual disease, they turn out to have complete response on the pathology. So the pathological assessment is, as usual in many places, it is considered the gold standard. And the patients who achieve a PCR have an excellent prognosis, has been shown in multiple studies. So what is the definition of PCR? That there is absence of residual invasive cancer in the resected breast specimen and all the sampled regional lymph nodes following the NACT. Now, AJCC kind of adds a prefix Y in the staging system to let us know that this staging is after chemotherapy. So this is an indicator that you are supposed to add to let the clinician know that this is post NACT assessment. And it is also shown that PCR rates across different subtypes vary according to the biomarker. So that is why also, especially in post chemo, it is important for you to know what was the pre-chemotherapy biopsy biomarker. What was the diagnosis, what was the grade, and what was the biomarker? Because if it is a HER2 positive or a triple negative, there are much higher chances of a patient achieving a pathological complete response than if it is a hormone positive tumor. So what is the role of pathologist in assessing the post-chemotherapy specimens? First of all, determining the residual tumor size and assessing how much is the response compared to pre-therapy tumor. You have to also distinguish the treatment effect on the benign breast from tumor. You have to detect nodal metastasis in the presence of treatment effect. And you have to also evaluate the margin status for occult singly infiltrating tumor cells, which can occur in a post-chemotherapy setting, especially if a wide excision has been done. And what are the challenges the pathologists face in this? Now, in contrast to all those nice things that I told you about the upfront specimen, how you can identify on palpation, and this is hard and this is firm, soft. Here, the tumor bed, because of the chemotherapy effect, post-chemotherapy, the tumor bed is difficult to identify and difficult to measure the size. It is less well defined. It is very softer. It becomes the more the response is there, the more there are going to be necrosis and macrophages, which cause the tumor to become soft in consistency. The cellularity will reduce. So again, the tumor is less hard. There is heterogeneity of response. So your actual, the measurements might not be accurate. Also, axillary nodes become softer, atrophic, more difficult to palpate. You have lesser yield of the nodes as compared to a upfront specimen without chemotherapy. And also, the assessment of the response can be variable. and specimen handling is not uniform across different centers. So reporting parameters, it was thought that a lot of different kind of parameter were being reported across different centers. So to help pathologists, a multidisciplinary initiative by the big NABCG group, which has produced standardized guidelines for evaluation and reporting of the post-neoadjuvant breast specimen. So what are the different features you can see in a post-chemotherapy specimen? Now, if you have a good response, if it's suppose sometimes, as I said, in a TNBC or a HER2 positive patient has received targeted therapy, there might be complete pathological response, and in the gross specimen, you might not identify anything at all except maybe a little bit of hemorrhage here and there, or a little bit of fibrosis like here. So if there is a complete pathological response, if the tumor bed might become, the pre-therapy tumor size might be 3, 4, 5 centimeter, but what you are identifying on the specimen might be just either almost near normal looking breast or maybe little bit of fibrosis, which might have harbor little bit of residual microscopic tumor. Or if you have a partial response, you can have it in two patterns. You can have a concentric response that the tumor has kind of shrunk. That's so the periphery has become completely fibrotic and you have viable tumor at the center. So, but the cellularity is the same as it would have been in a upfront setting. Or you can have a kind of, there is decrease in cellularity, but the size remains the same. Or you can have what is known as a buckshot response, which is also a heterogeneous response, that you are having some amount of tumor here and there in scattered foci, and what you are seeing on gross as a ill-defined area of tumor, you can have microscopic extent even beyond this. What was the pre-treatment tumor size? You can have microscopic extent beyond this grossly visible tumor. So these are the difficulties you encounter in doing the grossing and measuring the distances accurately, as well as identifying the tumor bed on the gross specimen of a post-chemotherapy specimen. There are a lot of number of different ways in which the response assessment or the tumor regression grade can be given. Most commonly, like there are lots of different parameters that you have to include in different types of grading system, and the grading system generally is as per your institutional practice or the locally prevalent practice or the country's prevalent practice. In our setup, most of the time we give enough information that you can cover which most of these the scoring systems to assess the response, and most commonly we use the AJCC as well as the residual cancer burden. We give enough information in the report, so as per both these staging systems, the tumor can be staged, and accordingly the clinician can take the decision. So AJCC, as I said, the TNM staging remains the same as in the upfront setting. The T size, N size, M size, M status, everything remains the same. Only thing you have to remember is to add the YP status, Y pathological response, indicating that all this T size, N size, and everything is as per the post-chemotherapy status. For deciding the residual cancer burden response assessment system, for that you have to give the primary tumor bed area as well as the overall cellularity. I will explain how, and as well as the percentage of cancer that is in situ. And as for the lymph node, you have to give the number of positive nodes and the diameter, which you are already doing anyway. There's nothing different here. But what happens is that once you feed all this information on a readily available internet accessible free calculator given by the MD Anderson Hospital, you get, it generates what is known as the RCB class 0, 1, 2, 3. And accordingly, if it is RCB 0, it is considered pathologic complete response. And as per the different grades and depending on the amount of tumor that is left behind, you can have either minimal, moderate, or extensive residual disease. And all of these have shown to be prognostically relevant. So that is why we give both AJCC as well as the RCB in our center. What is the difference between AJCC and RCB? Now, if you have a concentric type of response, as I showed you, then AJCC and RCB is the same. The maximum T size in the AJCC is also going to be the maximum contiguous size that you see, as well as in the RCB, it is going to be the same. In the primary tumor, as well as the lymph node, AJCC and RCB are the same. The difference comes in when it is a buckshot type or a decreased cellularity kind of response, then your RCB, you have to give the span of the tumor, the largest span. While in AJCC, as you know, the single largest contiguous focus. So we try to give both information in our report, that as per this is the span of the tumor identified on microscopy and gross, and this is the largest contiguous focus. We try to give both as far as possible in a report, so that as per the criteria, wherever it goes in the world, they can use this information to stage the tumor according to the system that they are using at their place. Anywhere in the world the patient goes, your report should be complete. So how do you do the grossing? You identify the tumor bed and give the largest two-dimensional measurement and submit the largest cross section. Now again, this is similar to what I have told you earlier, except that here it is very, very important that you give the sampling in a grid and with a cross section of with an oriented grid diagram. If possible, photograph, radiograph, but if not, definitely a grid diagram is extremely essential. Now, how will you gross this? Once you have given the diagram and you have identified the tumor bed and you have given the section code. Now, in this section, what they have not done is shown that this is the surrounding area around the tumor bed. So this area is also there. The section that they have given is the picture that they have shown is only for the tumor bed, but the area around the tumor bed also has to be there in each and every section, because as I said, the gross extent might be different from the microscopic extent. So your tumor might be extending beyond your grossly visible tumor. So you have to have sections with area of the surrounding normal, grossly normal looking tissue in each section. So these are then given, the sections are given, and then you have assess them on the slide that in this slide, this is the tumor area marked as per the grid diagram. So how much percentage cellularity am I having in each section? You give the cellularity count to each this thing, and overall cellularity, you make an average of all the 5 sections, and you give an overall percentage of the in situ carcinoma of this thing. Now this is the entire tumor, not just the invasive tumor. The entire tumor is this much cellularity, of which this much is in situ. So that both information you provide, and you will be able to enter it into your RCB calculator, as well as, of course, you must try to give, if you are able to identify on the gross as well as microscopy with the help of T-size reconstruction, as I already showed you, that which is the largest dimension of the contiguous tumor focus for the HCC staging. So this is just an example where we had a slice of MRM in a post-chemotherapy state, and we could identify a kind of a concentric round hard tumor over here, and this area around it also looked abnormal. So possibly this was the tumor bed. The tumor bed, the size that we were seeing here was around 1 centimeter, while the pre-therapy radiology gave the tumor size is somewhere around 3.5 centimeter. So we have to sample a little bit more generously, and you have to give the do the gridding in this way and make a diagram like this, which reflects the way that you have gridded the tumor and what are the areas of abnormality. You identify that area of the tumor, as well as you have identified the tumor bed, what you think was the area of abnormality, as well as any other abnormal areas that you felt around it that could be part of the tumor. You give the diagram, you give the orientation from the skin structure, the base, how far it is, and you give the grid in this manner, so that when the slides are being seen on microscopy with the help of your diagram, it will be very clear to the person seeing the slides that where the tumor was located, how do I reconstruct the T size. Suppose they are seeing the slide, a lot of tumor present in the slide number 1. Then with the help of your diagram, the gross size you have given is around 1 centimeter. They can make again, orient the slides in the same way as in the grid and give the more accurate T size on microscopy. And how much of the sampling you have to do on a in a post chemotherapy specimen as per the big NABCG. As I said, we do a systematic sampling. We take at least one slice of the complete grid and as many parallel grids as it requires to completely document the tumor bed, especially when there is no grossly viable tumor. If it is a large grossly viable tumor, you take even one single grid or 5 different representative areas. That is enough. It is a properly grossly viable tumor. Or if you are seeing some amount of response, then you give it's a small specimen, less than 5 centimeter. You can submit it entirely with the margins, especially that would be, of course, a wide excision. But the criteria is that you have to give at least 1 to 2 tissue blocks per 1 centimeter of pre-treatment tumor size, not the post-treatment, not what you are seeing grossly, but you have to orient it with the help of the pre-treatment tumor size, the radiological features that are available, that the tumor was originally say 3 centimeter, that minimum at least 3 to 6, if required more, you have to sample. For large tumors, 5 representative blocks of a cross section of the pre-treatment area of involvement and several such grids, at least 1 centimeter apart, up to a maximum of 25 blocks is what is recommended. If you are not seeing if the microscopy does not show a residual tumor, and if it is thought that it is not conveying the if it is not matching the radiological impression that it was radiologically it was thought to be residual tumor, but we are not seeing anything in that one particular grade or only we have given, then you can go back and sample more. So try to maintain the orientation. And again, the more sections have to be sampled again in a grid manner, so that if in the next grade your tumor comes, again you are able to orient and do the reconstruction properly. Lymph node sampling, there is no different. It is the same as upfront surgery. So this brings me to the last MCQ.
Which of the following is true? A. For all practical purposes, a YPT in AJCC and RCB are same. B. Grossly viable residual tumor needs more number of sections than no grossly viable tumor. C. Grid diagrams help in T-size reconstruction of residual tumor. D. It is required to sample 1 to 2 sections per centimeter of post-treatment T-size. So most of them are giving C as the answer.
This was
ma'am.
just my closing line. So just to again give you a nice this thing of while going back that yes, you have got the answer correctly. And so AJCC and RCB are not the same in all situations. And of course, if it is no grossly visible tumor, then more sampling has to be done compared to a grossly visible tumor, and you need to do the sectioning of the pre-treatment T size. So thank you, and I would like to take questions.
Ma'am, actually, it was a very nice talk, and you have covered all things. I think there is no questions so far, except for one or two. Ma'am, should I take or invite the chairperson to give the comments?
Yeah, you can, I think, ask the questions also.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. They are asking, with the case of mucinous carcinoma post chemo, grossly the tumor measure 90 millimeter, but microscopically majority is mucin, with the cellularity of residual tumor cells less than 5%. Do you encounter such case, and how do you stage the YPT?
Yeah, so in this particular case, actually, it is the mucin can also be a post-therapy effect. If a presence of mucin can be like you have necrosis, you can also have extracellular mucin as a post-therapy effect. So the mucin does not have to be counted. The gross size might be 1.9, but your T size will be the largest contiguous focus that you are seeing of the viable tumor. Or if it is present in multiple sections, then you have to reconstruct it in the same way as a T-size reconstruction of the largest span of the tumor. So you do not count the extent of the mucin as your extent of the tumor. You either see the maximum size. If it is present only in 1 or 2 sections, you can see the maximum size of the contiguous tumor, or you have to make a T-size reconstruction with the help of a grid diagram and say that the tumor cells, viable tumor cells, extend from this, this size to this size, and excluding the extracellular mucin.
Okay, ma'am. And one more question, I think you have already answered. During grossing of post-chemo specimen, sometimes it is difficult to measure tumor bed. Do we measure fibrotic area first and revise the gross measurement after measure YPT microscopically?
Yeah, so that is what I highlighted, that your gross measurement might not be accurate. If you are seeing a fibrotic area, you have to also correlate that with the pre-treatment tumor size and location, because sometimes fibrocystic changes. We get a lot of samples where the pre-treatment tumor size was say 2 centimeter, but in the mastectomy the grosser is identified 7 centimeter ill-defined fibrotic area karke, and they have given the section, and that all turns out to be fibrocystic. So again, you have to orient your specimen with the help of the radiology and see which quadrant, which area, and what was the pre-treatment tumor size. Now, unless they have clinically documented that the tumor grew after the chemotherapy, The tumor is not going to suddenly become from 2 centimeter to 7, 10 centimeter, 10 centimeter. And you can clearly see that it is fibrocystic, that rubbery kind of thing is there. Now the tumor bed might not be very apparent. So you have to again orient it and try to give the area where you have, if you have, good amount of response, then again you have that ill-defined fibrotic area, yellowishness, necrotic, chalky areas you might find. So those areas you have to sample, as well as if you feel, okay, this large fibrotic area, somewhere the tumor is within that, then you have to sample and give a, if those areas are separate from each other, give an intervening distance, because for all you know, it might be a multifocal tumor with different areas of response, or it might be a single large tumor in which there has been a heterogeneity of response. Okay, so you have to accordingly sample, you have to use your judgment along with the help of the pre-therapy radiology and size and location, and then orient it accordingly, sample the areas. And if you have to use your judgment that if it was 2 centimeters, suddenly, 5 centimeter, 10 centimeter, 15 centimeter, increase in size does not happen. So am I looking at something fibrocystic, and whether I am sampling the correct area. Documentation of the tumor bed and the absence of the documentation of tumor bed on microscopy is also important. In such cases, if you are able to identify the tumor on microscopy, the microscopic T size will predominate over the gross T size in post-chemotherapy specimen, because post-chemotherapy is, as I said, prone to inaccuracies because of the effect of therapy. So again, gridding and giving the reconstructing the T size as per the grid is very important. And that will be considered the final T size.
Which scoring system is more appropriate for post-chemotherapy cases, RCB or Miller-Payne?
Yeah, so that is why I said there are number of scoring systems, and you have to, as per your institutional practice, you can use the scoring system. In our institute, that is why I said we do the AJCC and RCB, but we try to give the information in the report covering majority of the different scoring systems, so that any place the patient goes where they use different kind of scoring system. So most of the scoring systems will have the either pre-therapy T size and post-therapy T size. They will have the cellularity. Some scoring systems you give the cellularity of the pre-therapy biopsy as compared to the post-therapy residual, how much cellularity is there, and as well as the number of nodes involved. So most of these, and in some scoring system, presence of only DCIs is considered PCR, while in other scoring system, presence of DCIs is considered residual disease. So if you give the information, enough information is there in your report, according to whatever the scoring system is being used by a clinician, they will be able to fit the report in that criteria. So you can give the maximum information, but if your institute follows a particular scoring system, of course you have to make sure that you are giving the parameters sufficient for that scoring system. So it is a little bit as per institutional practice. I cannot say that you have to use this is better or that is better. All of the scoring systems have shown prognostic relevance. That is why they are there in literature.
Words are less in dictionary to praise you for a clear concept making presentation. So there are a lot of appreciation for your talk, ma'am, and it's really wonderful hearing to you. And one question: single tumor cells in node identified by CK. They have put query. So how to identify single tumor cells in node?
If it is ITCs in an upfront setting, there is no indication. None of the guidelines say that you have to do CK in every case to identify singly scattered tumor cells. And even if it is singly scattered tumor cells as ITCs, they will not be counted as positive nodes anyway. So routine CK staining for each and every lymph node is not required. Only if you are suspecting, especially in post-chemo setting, if you're suspecting presence of residual tumor and you are not able to identify whether this is a macrophage or this is a tumor cell, in such cases, CK will help. Or if you are having a doubt about the size of the tumor, in such cases, CK might help, that whether it is micrometastasis or it is ITC or macro, then in such cases, the CK might help. But as per guidelines, there is no requirement to do CK upfront in every case to identify ITCs.
Okay. If patient present with bilateral mastectomy, should we stage them separately? I mean, giving separate report for each mastectomy specimen.
Yes. Both the mastectomy are basically two different specimens and they have to be staged individually.
Another question is margins for invasive carcinoma 2 millimeter or 2 centimeter.
No, for DCIS you have a margin cutoff of 2 millimeter. For invasive cancer, the tumor at the ink is the criteria. The distances are not. I think if it is you're talking about the lymph node size, then it is the cutoff is 2 millimeter and 0.2 millimeter for micro ITC. But for the distance of the invasive tumor for the from the ink, there is only the tumor at the ink is the positive margin. You can choose to give the distances from the margin as when it is closed within 5 millimeter, but it is not a mandatory parameter.
So far, these are the questions, ma'am.
So,
Ma'am, I have one doubt. If in the same quadrant, two foci of tumor is there, but the distance is more than 5 centimeter, is it multifocal or
so
multicenter?
that is why I said quadrants we are making with our eyes, what you have oriented as the same quadrant, if you slightly twist it in the other direction, it will become two different
Ma'am, is
quadrants.
there any way that you will follow to identify the quadrants while crossing?
No, so that is why I said that this importance has to be given to the distance, not to the
Okay.
quadrant. Quadrant, these initially they were described as multifocal, multicentric. What is important is the distance. So if it is more than
Okay.
5 centimeter, it is going to be multicentric.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Okay. Ma'am, that was wonderful. Geeta, ma'am,
Yeah, I think
do you
we
want to
can
give any?
invite. Yeah, we can invite the chairperson to give the comments.
Ma'am, I think
Ma'am,
you can stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ayushi. I think a tremendous 2 hours effort, despite you are not well. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for an excellent class and taking all the questions. I don't think we have chairperson with us today. Dr. Borges is a little unwell, so she's not been able to join. And Kea also has left. I think that's that. We can end the meeting here. Or Ayushi, if you have any final comments for the students.
So one thing again I would like to highlight is to use your fingers as well as your eyes, especially because you're going to get mastectomies. If you get more in a wide excision, it is easier because there is a smaller specimen. The tumor is going to be somewhere in there. But in mastectomies, to identify the tumor, to identify multifocal tumors, and to identify post-chemotherapy tumor bed, please make some amount of extra effort. Just don't gross it, cut it up, give whatever the most biggest lesion that you are seeing and finish it off. There is an implication of this. There is a treatment implication. There is a psychological implication, and there is for you as a pathologist, there is an implication of your report being correct. Okay, so please do make an extra effort of trying to look for the lesions, keeping in mind all the clinical, radiological, and the various parameters that you have at hand, and try to get those parameters at hand before you gross.
Thank you, Ayushi, very much.